Modern society often separates spirituality and leadership in the corporate world. On the contrary, I think we can be better leaders if we lean into our spiritual side at work. Interestingly, I've observed enough leaders with Indian heritage inspire and empower organizations and teams with a strong sense of spirituality infused into their work that I decided to test my hypothesis that this is not a coincidence. My guest today, Aditya Sharma, is a sales team lead and mindfulness practitioner in Bangalore, India, and regularly connects with his inner spirituality to inspire and engage his team. Together, we will explore the history of spirituality in India, how it has shaped modern spirituality in the country, and how leadership and spirituality should be combined to create an engaged workforce. This is E3. Engage and empower with empathy. Welcome to the show today, Aditya. I'm super excited about this conversation. You and I have been talking a lot about spirituality and leadership behind the scenes for the last few months, so much so that it inspired the idea to have this conversation live in front of the whole world. So thank you for agreeing to do this. And the first question I had for you actually is just around Indian leaders and spirituality. I recently had a realization that I was naturally drawn to Indian leaders, or at least leaders who have Indian cultural heritage. And off the top of my head, I can think of 5 Indian leaders who I follow closely and admire. Satya Nadella, Microsoft CEO, Udit Batra, the CEO of Waters Corporation, Yogan Desai, who is the founder and CEO of iStem Research, and Vas Narasimhan, who is Novartis' CEO, as well as Fareed Zakaria, who is a best-selling author and political commentator on CNN. And of course, you and I used to be colleagues. Obviously, I was drawn to you as well as an Indian leader and really appreciated the way you motivated and empowered your team. And in addition, I'm going to get a little bit personal here. You were one of my biggest pillars of support after I was laid off from my job in March. I went through a really rough period in April, and despite your busy schedule and the time zone difference between the US and India, you were there for me every day. You sent me words of motivation. You called me regularly. And in fact, you infused your deep connection with spirituality into the way that you engaged with me and guided me through this difficult period. And you have no idea how much this made a positive impact on me. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. No, first of all, thank you so much for having me here. This is my first ever podcast. So I'm a bit nervous. I'm very excited, but at the same time, nervous as well. Thank you so much for such kind words, Rebecca, and means a lot. And it's been great talking to you, great catching up with you.
Well, thank you, Aditya. No need to be nervous. I think this conversation is your sweet spot. It's right up your alley of expertise, and I'm just dying to ask you: is this just a crazy coincidence that I happen to look up to and admire Indian leaders, or is there something about Indian culture that creates inspiring and empathetic leaders?
First of all, I think you yourself are spiritual. I think you are interested in spirituality and the purpose, and I think that's probably interests you. And yes, I think Indian culture is full of spirituality, mythology. We are very religious. You will find all sort of religions in India. We all grew up, listening to those amazing stories, mythological characters, and every religion has those great heroes, those amazing stories. And many of them have been bedtime stories with grandparents, with mother and father, and I think some of those characters in those stories, they inspire the kids from, since the childhood. And then we grow up actually watching a lot of those stories, reading books. There are a lot of movies, TV serials and programs around it. So I think right from the childhood, it leaves a great impression on the mind, on people here in India. There are some great leadership lessons in some of those stories, and that is something which I think people carry with them. And when they come to corporates, that thought process is there in the mind. And I think that guides many of them, including me. And I really got very inspired by some of those characters. It's a learning every day. So you keep on learning around it. So I think that probably could be one of the reasons. You took name of Narsimhan of Novartis. Narsimhan is again a form of God, who took an incarnation to kill a demon. So those are some fascinating stories, and I think many of Indian leaders have grown with those stories, and I think that leaves an impression on them.
So, was there a particular story as a child that really resonated with you, Aditya?
There are so many of them. We have some great scriptures in Ramayana and Mahabharata, and there are some amazing characters there, some amazing leaders there. There are so many stories and so many characters in those stories, and you can learn a lot about how to do things right, how to treat your team, how to motivate others, how to do your duty, and how to really detach yourself from some of those outcomes and just focus on what is required to be done. So there are so many of those great stories and great characters who really influence you when you watch those stories or read those stories.
It's fascinating to me because, obviously when you're a child, you're a sponge and you're so um, your ability to absorb information and learn new things is much greater than as you become older and become an
Yeah,
adult. So the fact that you're introduced as children to these mythological stories and spirituality, and it's infused into your bedtime stories at such a young age, I can see where that would just become a natural part of who you are without even realizing it because it was
yeah,
introduced at such a young age. The other fascinating thing, too, is India has such a rich spiritual history. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is Buddha, of course.
yeah,
The heart of Buddhism was born in India in the 5th or 6th century BC. And then there is Gandhi, who inspired movements for civil rights and freedom around the world, especially in India when it was still under British rule. And interestingly, there also seems to be a shift in modern India. So when we look at the middle class in India, there's a shift from organized religion to spirituality. And there's actually research that has been done on this in the Journal of Spirituality and Mental Health. And the research indicated that an increasing number of Indians identify less with the ritual aspect of organized religion and more with strengthening the connection to higher purpose, strengthening connection to nature and society, which spirituality offers. And I also absolutely love all the Indian festivals that celebrate humanity and spirituality. I think of Holi, the festival of colors, love, and spring. You sent me a bunch of really nice pictures back in April or May, whenever it took place. It looked absolutely amazing. So, what is your personal experience with spirituality, and how does it affect the way you connect with your family, your friends, and your coworkers?
I would say I am a spiritual person, and I'm also one of this generation where we are not so much into rituals, but trying to really finding more about ourselves, trying to find a connection with the world around us, with the people around us, with nature, finding the purpose, finding ways to live a better life, not only for us, but for others as well, and trying to really upgrade the whole living experience, right? Becoming more aware about what we are, and why we are this way and how do we get better from here. So I think, um, for me, my journey has been in the last 10 years, and it got accelerated with COVID. And this is where I really started getting into learning more about it. There is a very famous speaker called Brahma Kumari's Shivani, and she gives talks around many of these areas. I started listening to her, and it had very deep impact on me. It really helped me to come out of some of the issues which I had, helped me getting better mentally, live a more aware life. This is something a lot of people today are looking forward to, right? So the physical pain, the physical well-being, there is a lot of focus. For physical pain, we have doctors, we know when to go there. But mental well-being is a big problem today for many of corporates. We work under stress, and it's a very competitive world. Everybody is trying to win, everybody is trying to get ahead, and during that process that stress is building, and there are many who are not able to manage that stress, and that's where the problem starts. And the sad part is that many of these people don't even know that they need help. They won't realize it, unlike the physical problem. So I think that is where the spirituality might help. Some of these conversations might help keeping mental balance, keeping those thoughts under control. I think that's something which is very, very important. Um, and like which you said, India is definitely a place full of festivals. Every other week, you might be having some festival in some part of the country. It's so diverse, it's so rich. And I think in a way, it's a stress buster. People get together, they dance, they have food. Holi is actually my favorite festival. I love it. We throw colors on each other, and it's said that in Holi, you can embrace any of your like hardcore enemy, and nobody bothers. You can put colors on them and nobody would mind it. So I think it's all about living a simple life and not really getting into too much of those negative thoughts, and that's where spirituality helps. And some of these deeper conversations, they help a lot. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned Holy, as I have a lovely picture of you with your daughter that I'll show for those of you who are watching the video version of this podcast. I'll bring up a picture of Aditya with his daughter, and they're covered in color, and you can just see the joy in their faces. It's I would have loved to have been there to experience that celebration.
So maybe
Um,
sometime in future, near future, come over to India during holy times. You would love it.
I have no doubt. I will take you up on that offer as soon as I can.
Sure.
The interesting thing that you brought up, and I'd like you to talk about this a little bit more. You said you started to during the pandemic really start doing these daily walks and listening to
Yoga.
this
Yeah.
guru.
Yeah.
What 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 triggered you to start doing this at that time?
Because there was a lockdown, and I knew that I cannot be physically so active, and then you cannot go out of house, you cannot meet your friends, you can't go to market, and I think it's like you're in a jail, right? It's a nice homely jail, but you are in a jail. And I think that thought itself triggers that stress that your freedom has been taken away from you. You are just confined. So I proactively started thinking that I need to do something about it. So I got into yoga, I got into meditation, I got into this aspect of spirituality. So, one, I want to keep my body fit. I want to make sure that I do right things to keep myself fit physically. But more important was that how do I remain mentally stable, and how do I not really get into that mode of being stressful. And then I I know some of my friends and family members who some of them actually got into a state of depression by listening those sad news every other day. There were so many deaths around. So I think that was very, very stressful time.
Yeah.
And I know some people who are still not completely out of it. So that was the time where I thought proactively I need to get into it. I got inclined into it, started reading, I started listening to some of those YouTube channels, podcasts, and that really, really helped me to remain stable, remain positive. Uh, and that has helped me even after that. So when I came back to job, I came back to work, regular routine, it has really helped.
So, the final question I had for you, Aditya, is really around your top three takeaways for business leaders. Obviously, you are a very spiritual person. You learned a lot about your own personal spirituality during the pandemic when you really started adopting these mindfulness practices. What would be your advice to business leaders who want to understand how they can better integrate spirituality into their daily leadership practice in order to create more engaged and empowered teams?
Well, let me put that question. So I think for leaders, it's very important to keep their mental balance. They should know how to manage stress because all the leaders are working in this world which is highly competitive, and there is a lot of demand on their time. There is a lot of demand from the organizations. Leaders today have to do so much at any given point in time. So I think for a leader, it's important that they take care of their health very well. Not only the physical health but also mental health. So I think it's very important to practice some form of maybe spirituality or meditation or any other technique which helps you relax, which helps you being calm. Some people listen to music, some people read, whatever it is. I think it's very, very critical to be able to control those emotions and that stress. It's equally important not to pass that stress and that whole negative energy to the team. Because if the team has to perform, they should also be in a good state of mind. I don't think leaders are doing it on purpose or they are even aware that they are passing on so much of stress to the team. It happens subconsciously. So I think for the leaders, it's very important to be aware. I'm not saying that everybody should become spiritual uh, and not really demand things. Of course, we have to be competitive. We need to do what is the best for the organization and do our best. But I think and they have to drive the teams. They have to challenge the teams. But the how part is very, very important. How you do it, it's very critical. Some leaders they shout and yell and think that's the way to get things done. Actually, it does more harm. Organization, the team, the morale goes down. So I think it's all about keeping calm, really looking at those challenges which come your way, taking them one by one, and really looking at what you can control and what is beyond your control. I think that understanding is also very critical. And most of the time, we are trying to control what we cannot control, and it really builds the stress. I think practicing some of these techniques, whatever works for one, I think it's important to do that. So, taking care of yourself and then taking care of your team, people around you, even the family. I know people who come back and bring the office back, and then there is a lot of negative energy in the house. I think that's not good for the relationships, whether in office or at home. So I think it's important to really disconnect for some time and focus on physical and mental well-being. In India, for example, we are seeing so many cases nowadays where you have people in 20s and 30s and of course 40s is the age, but even in 20s and 30s getting heart attacks, right? So that's bad. So I think we really need to spend some time on this and make some real effort around some of these areas.
Yeah, that's a really unfortunate trend. I know in the United States, our Surgeon General actually issued an official report about Americans feeling more isolated now than they've ever felt since reporting began. So I think I think the pandemic did a lot to a lot of people around the world, and it's manifesting in different ways now, depending on which country you're in and what you experienced during that time. But I think it's important to your point, to address that we went through a really challenging time together as a world. Just because it's behind us now doesn't mean that there aren't we're not experiencing residual effects of that from a mental health perspective, and it should be taken into consideration, especially among business leaders who are taking care of people as part of their responsibility at work. And I think what really what I really admire about you, Aditya, and what I have observed in your ability to lead your team is your point around control. You just have this innate ability to understand what is within your span of control and what isn't, and you don't let the things outside of your control get to you. And I think that was one of the important messages that you delivered to me when I was laid off from my job. You kept reminding me this is beyond your control. This is an external force. Focus on what's within, what you can control inside yourself, and that ultimately impacts your mental state. And I think because you have that ability to really separate the two, you bring this sense of positivity to your team regardless of what's happening around you. I mean, you could have chaos, complete chaos happening around you, Aditya, and you will still bring a sense of steadiness and positivity to your team. And I think that's a really special gift that not many leaders know how to embrace. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit more. I think you and I were talking one time about traffic in India and how if you're stuck in traffic, it's like well, you can't do anything about it. So you could, but your friends told you something about if you yell at traffic, it won't yell back or what, or it's not going to respond.
Yeah, he said that he has stopped yelling at traffic because it doesn't listen. So, so yeah, I think it's important to really know what can be controlled, and if you see in reality, the only thing which we individuals can control is our response to this external chaos or external stimulus. That's the only thing which is controllable. There is no way we can control others' way my team members react, or my manager reacts, or my wife reacts, or my kid reacts. There is no way. I have no control on it. Most of the time, we spend a lot of amount of energy to control all this, and it's not going to happen. So the only thing which can be controlled is how we respond to those things. And most of the time, we are not responding; we are reacting. It's like a pilot mode. Something happens, we have a reaction to it without even being aware. People say, I didn't want to hit my kid, but I just raised my hand. How can you raise your hand? How can your hand even do something without your permission, right? So which means it's out of control. So so only thing which is controllable is our response, and I think that's where most of the energy should go, rather than controlling people or controlling situations on which we have absolutely zero control. Sometimes we have a perception that we can control people, but no, there is no way you can do that until people really they themselves realize that what's the right thing to do. Or even sometimes your kids, you s- you ask them to stop doing something, they would do more of it, especially teens. My daughter is a teen now, so we experience it all the time. Until she realizes that this is not the right thing to do, she would stop. Otherwise, she would say, just because you say, I won't stop doing it, I won't start doing it. So I think that's something which is very important. Understanding that is very critical, and it applies in the business, in the corporate world. Um, there is only so much you can control, but then the best part is to find the right responses to the external situations. But you cannot really have a right response to those situations if you're not in the right frame of mind. So that's why for the leaders, it's very important being in the right frame of mind so that you can take right decisions about things and not really reacting to some of those external situations, people behaviors, people reactions, and really getting carried away in that. And then many a times we make wrong decisions because of that.
That's a great point, and it reminds me a lot of the conversation I had with Annabelle Tonkovich in the last episode when we were talking about leaders walking the talk when it comes to wellness at work, whether it's meditating over lunch hour or going for a run, to really openly demonstrate that this is behavior that you condone so that your team sees it and embraces it. And I
Yeah.
imagine your team is seeing you come with a sense of mindfulness and presence and being centered in yourself rather than reacting to things. And that then serves as a role model for them. So you are a living example of a leader walking the talk.
Thank you for that. I just give an example. Other day, I was trying to reach one of my colleague, and it was really critical. It was a little bit late. Usually, I don't call my team late in the evening, but this was important. So I was trying to reach, and I called maybe a couple of times, left a few messages, but I didn't get a response. So I was okay. And then I think around 9 o'clock in the night, I got a call back from my colleague, and she says her mother was hospitalized, and she says, I'm going home, and I know this is important. I'll go home and I'll do it. Now, when this happens, the first natural reaction comes to us is, what the hell is going on? Why this person is not picking up my phone? And especially if you are a senior leader, you expect people to pick your call right away and start responding to you, but we really don't think in this direction that that person might be going through some difficulty, might be having something in the family that this person is taking care of. So I think so that having that frame of mind is important, but it comes with practice because the way we are groomed by the corporate world, it's the natural reaction to start driving people, and not really thinking, taking a step back and thinking that there might be something wrong with the person, right? So, or the family, the person itself might be in some difficulties. That's what empathy is all about, right? With the talk which you are having, the podcast which you are running, and being empathetic is critical, and it's important. That really helps, building strong and motivated teams. It pays off. Most of the time, I've seen people think that if you're an empathetic leader, you're a weak leader. People think as a leader, if you want to be effective, you should be like all aggressive and shouting and yelling, and that's only the things get done, which is not true. It's not very productive, maybe a quarter, 2 quarters, but after that, people start leaving because the environment becomes so toxic. I think it's important for employees to know that my manager or the leader understands me. Everybody comes to job to do things better, to do a good job. Nobody thinks in the morning, today I'll go to office and I'll do a bad job. No, nobody thinks like that. Everybody's trying their best, and I think that's our job as leaders to make sure that understand why a person is not able to do their job, what's the issue, what's the problem, and then trying to figure it out and fix it.
That reminds me of a video I watched from Simon Sinek on leading with empathy,
Yeah.
where he gave an example of someone not making their sales numbers.
Yeah.
And the person comes into the manager's office and the manager says, "Hey, I noticed you didn't make your numbers this quarter. What's going on?"
Yeah.
So that's one option. The other option is, "Hey, I noticed you didn't make your numbers this quarter. Are you okay? Is everything okay?" So there are two different approaches. I mean, to your point, it's you can you can come to work and just be super aggressive and beat people down, or you can understand that everyone is coming to work with good intentions, wanting to do a good job, and you never know what people's backstories are and what might be going on in their personal lives. So I love the way wrapped up this conversation, Aditya. I think that's a great final word for our audience, and really demonstrates how important empathy is in leading teams and retaining employees, keeping them empowered and engaged. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
this very inspiring conversation. It was so wonderful to have you on the podcast today.
Rebecca, thanks a lot. Really, really appreciate you having me here, being my first podcast partner, and I would remember it for a long time.
If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Life is too short. Let's take care of each other at work so that together we can make this world a better place.